Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're basically acting as court reporters. We're zeroing in on the House Oversight Committee's intense, totally closed-door inquiry into Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and specifically, his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. The details leaking out of Capitol Hill right now are raising massive questions about transparency, political protection, and what actually went down behind those closed doors.
All right, let's just dive right into the docket. We're going to systematically walk through the congressional inquiry, the exact timeline of Lutnick's ties, his secret testimony, the fierce accusations of a cover-up, and finally, the political fallout.
Part 1. The Congressional Inquiry. Let's get right to the facts. Why exactly is a sitting U.S. Commerce Secretary facing a congressional panel over his past associations with a convicted sex trafficker?
So the backdrop to all of this is the ongoing fallout from that massive release of DOJ files. We're talking millions of pages detailing the Epstein investigation. And buried within that massive document dump, Howard Lutnick's name, thrust directly into the spotlight, revealing connections that completely contradict his own public statements.
But here's the really jarring contrast. Despite millions of these documents being forced into the public eye, Lutnick's testimony before the House Oversight Committee was kept totally under wraps, entirely in secret. The core issue for many lawmakers is that the Republican majority allowed the Commerce Secretary to testify unsworn and without a single video camera in the room. This lack of a visual record, it's become a massive point of contention, as you'll see in a minute. Moving on to Part 2, the timeline of ties. Let's submit our first real pieces of evidence and map out the exact relationship timeline between Lutnick and Epstein, because this really explains why lawmakers are so incredibly skeptical. When you map it out chronologically, it actually starts in 2005. Lutnick and his wife toured Epstein's New York townhouse. You know, they were neighbors. Now keep in mind, Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting a minor in 2008. But the timeline shows Lutnick stayed in contact way after that conviction. They scheduled a meeting in 2011, Lutnick visited Epstein's private island in the Virgin Islands in 2012, and they literally did a business deal together in 2014. They were even emailing back and forth in 2018 about scaffolding for a museum renovation. And that brings us to this absolutely jarring juxtaposition. On a podcast last year, Lutnick publicly claimed that after that 2005 townhouse tour, where he reportedly saw massage tables and Epstein made suggestive comments, he and his wife decided to cut all ties because Epstein was, quote, gross. He said he would never be in the room with that disgusting person ever again. But then we have the DOJ files proving he actually took his wife, his 4 kids, and some friends to Epstein's private island for lunch in 2012. Plus, the connection wasn't just social. Documents show that on December 28, 2012, which, by the way, is just 4 days after that island lunch, entities controlled by Lutnick and Epstein signed a contract. They were acquiring stakes in a tech company called Adfin. And correspondence about these business ties kept going until at least 2014. Heck, as late as 2018, Lutnick was emailing Epstein to warn him that museum renovations next door might block your sunlight. Obviously, these glaring discrepancies between his podcast claims and the official DOJ files triggered some serious demands from Congress. Senator Jackie Rosen, for instance, fired off an official letter demanding Lutnick release his flight logs from 2005 to 2019 just to figure out the true extent of his travel and his visits to the island. Which leads us right into Part 3, the secret testimony. Let's see how all of this built up to the actual closed-door hearing where lawmakers grilled the Commerce Secretary for hours. According to Democrats who were in the room, the defense Lutnick offered was, frankly, baffling. Representative Khanna actually said Lutnick made a farce of the English language. When they confronted him with his podcast quote about never being in a room with Epstein again, Lutnick allegedly tried to redefine the word I. He claimed he only meant he personally wouldn't be in a room with Epstein, but that it was perfectly fine for his wife and kids to be in a room with him on the island. Seriously. And it gets stranger. During the testimony, Lutnick claimed he had no idea how Epstein's assistant even knew he was vacationing in the Virgin Islands. He testified that the lunch invitation was inexplicable and unsettling. But think about that. Despite feeling unsettled by an invitation from a convicted sex offender he previously called disgusting, he still chose to go and bring his kids. When lawmakers pressed him over and over on why he went to the island, he testified that he simply could not remember. All right, Part 4, accusations of a cover-up. This is the absolute core of the political storm right now.
The intense skepticism from his interrogators has morphed into heavy allegations from Democrats that the secret hearing is part of a broader, orchestrated cover-up protected by the administration and congressional Republicans. Following the testimony, Democratic Representative Yassamin Ansari absolutely did not hold back. She stepped right out of that room and explicitly labeled the Commerce Secretary a pathological liar. She argued that by brushing off his interactions as meaningless and inconsequential, he's actively covering for the powerful network of individuals who enabled Epstein's crimes. And hey, remember that lack of video cameras we talked about earlier? Well, Representative Khanna argued that the Republican majority deliberately blocked any video recording specifically to protect Lutnick from public scrutiny. Khanna stated that Lutnick's evasive, nervous performance was so bad, so embarrassing, that if the president had seen a video of it, it would have immediately cost the Commerce Secretary his job. Then there's the whole issue of blackmail. On that same podcast, Lutnick had publicly claimed Epstein engaged in blackmail and had video tips of powerful people. But in this closed-door session, he completely walked that back, saying he was just speculating. Lawmakers allege he only retracted this explosive claim after speaking with officials within the Trump administration. Obviously, that raises massive red flags for Democrats, who are asking who exactly is telling him to change his story. Now, to be fair, Republicans in the room saw the hearing entirely differently. Chairman James Comer completely disputed the Democrats' version of events. He stated that Lutnick was very transparent, that he voluntarily answered nearly 400 questions, and that he committed zero actual wrongdoing. Comer's argument is basically that Lutnick just came in to correct the record about a brief, uneventful visit to the island. Which brings us to our final section, the political fallout. What are the actual, real-world consequences of this incredibly high-stakes congressional exam? Where do we go from here?
Well, the verdict is highly polarized, to say the least. On one side, lawmakers across the aisle are demanding accountability. And this even includes Republicans, like Representative Thomas Massie, the guy who co-authored the law releasing the Epstein files in the first place. He flat out stated Lutnick has a lot to answer for and should just resign. On the flip side, the White House is firmly maintaining full support for their Commerce Secretary, brushing the inquiry off as a feeling attempt by the legacy media to distract from the administration's accomplishments.
But this inquiry is just one chapter because the committee's work isn't done. The docket continues. They are now pushing to depose former Attorney General Pam Bondi over her handling of the DOJ files. They're also going after testimony from the prison guard who was on duty the night Epstein died, not to mention high-profile billionaires like Leon Black and Bill Gates. So that leaves us with one massive, lingering question. As more and more high-ranking officials get tied up in these documents, are we witnessing a vast institutional cover-up designed to protect a powerful network of enablers? Or is this closed-door inquiry just the standard, highly polarized political theater we see every day in Washington? Whatever your takeaway is, one thing is for sure. The scrutiny on the Epstein files is far from over. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep your eyes on the evidence.